The Great Stoic Civil War. Zeno versus Aristo.
You know, when we picture the Stoics, we tend to think of this unified block of wise old dudes with beards, all nodding along in perfect agreement. But the truth? It's so much messier. Stoicism was actually forged in the fire of some pretty intense debate and rivalry. So, let's dive into the forgotten civil war that, honestly, almost changed the entire philosophy as we know it. Yeah, so if you had this picture in your head of the early Stoics just sitting around a campfire on some kind of philosophical team-building retreat, well, get ready to scrap that image because things are about to get a whole lot more complicated and way more interesting. You see, history has this funny habit of smoothing out all the rough edges. It kind of hands us the highlight reel of the winners and just forgets about the brilliant challengers, the contrarians who questioned everything. And Stoicism? No exception at all. It had its own internal battles, and the biggest one was nothing less than a fight for its very soul. Okay, so at the very center of this whole conflict was one guy, a philosopher so brilliant and so persuasive that they actually nicknamed him the Siren. Let me introduce you to Aristo of Chios. So, picture this. On one side, you've got the establishment, right? Zeno, the founder, and Cleanthes, his super hardworking successor. Think of him as the coach. And then on the other side, you have Aristo, the natural talent, the eloquent challenger, the Siren, who was basically ready to tear down everything his teachers were trying to build. So what was the big fight all about? Well, it all boiled down to one single fundamental question. How are you actually supposed to live a good life? And really, it comes down to this question, one you can ask yourself right now. Do you need a detailed rulebook for life? Or can you just rely on your training, on your gut? That right there, that was the absolute core of the great Stoic debate. Okay, so Zeno's camp, the establishment, they came up with this super practical idea called preferred indifference. Basically, they said, look, being rich isn't morally better than being poor, but let's be real, all things being equal, it's probably nicer to have good health and a little money, right? They saw these things as just tools you can use virtuously. It's a pretty realistic middle-of-the-road approach. Aristotle, on the other hand, well, he thought this was complete nonsense. He famously dismissed all this practical advice as, and I quote, advice from old women. Ouch. To him, all these rules and preferences were just crutches. He believed a truly wise person doesn't need a cheat sheet for life. And this, right here, was the fundamental split. You had Zeno's approach, which was all about being practical, and Aristo's, which was all about being pure. So for Zeno, things like health and wealth were preferred indifference, nice to have but not essential. For Aristo, they were complete indifference. He made absolutely no distinction between them and, say, sickness or poverty. One side gives you a rulebook, the other tells you to rely on pure, trained intuition, like an athlete. Aristo had this really powerful way of explaining it. He said a general who's given command gets this thick book of practices. And what does he do? He says, burn them. Anytime a problem comes up, I'll make the decision at once, immediately. See, for him, a wise person isn't some student with a manual. They're a general on the battlefield. You don't look up the answer when a crisis hits. You trust your training and you make the call. Instantly. So, as you can probably guess, this philosophical debate didn't just stay philosophical. It quickly blew up into an all-out war. And yeah, it wasn't just academic anymore. It got personal, it got ugly. I mean, things escalated fast. First, you have these heated debates where Zeno, the founder, completely loses his cool and starts shouting at Aristo, calling him a babbler. Then Aristo fires back by publishing actual books attacking Zeno's doctrines. After that, the Stoics get together and orchestrate this elaborate prank to publicly humiliate him. And the final step? Aristo, totally shunned, just splits off and starts his own rival school, the Aristotelians. Okay, let's talk about that prank. The mainstream Stoics were just so fed up with Aristotle's whole idea that a wise person's intuition is basically flawless. So they decided to put it to the test. They set up this really clever trap designed to prove him wrong, once and for all. And it was simple, but pretty genius. Here's how it went down. They got one identical twin to leave a deposit with Aristo. A little while later, the other twin shows up to collect it. And Aristo, relying on his gut, his supposedly perfect intuition, was completely fooled. He handed the money over to the wrong guy. A simple rule like, asking for some kind of proof would have solved it, but his intuition failed him. And it wasn't just about pranks. The next head of the school, Chrysippus, really laid out the logical problem with Aristotle's whole philosophy. He basically asked, how could we even live if it didn't matter to us whether we were well or sick, or could keep off cold or hunger? It's a great question, right? How can society function if we make zero distinction between these things? It sounds like chaos. But Aristotle's reply was just as confident as you'd expect. He essentially said, you'll live, and you'll live splendidly, wonderfully. You will act as seems right to you. You will never sorrow, never desire, never fear. It's this beautiful, idealistic promise, right? But for his rivals, it was completely untethered from reality, dangerously impractical. So, in the end, Aristo basically lost. His school faded away, and Zeno's more practical version of Stoicism is the one that survived, the one we mostly know today. But that's not where the story ends. Not at all. Because the challenger's ideas didn't really die. They just went dormant. Yeah, his school, the Aristotelians, it just faded into history. But his questions? Oh, they did not. The really radical questions he asked, about relying on instinct over rules, about true, absolute indifference, those ideas kept echoing. They just wouldn't go away. And I mean, they echoed for a really long time. Just look at this. We're talking almost 400 years after Aristotle's death. And who picks up his writings? Only the most famous Stoic of all time, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. This part is just incredible. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, the ultimate Stoic, writes a letter saying that Aristo's writings are both delighting and tormenting him. He says they show how far his own character falls short. He's literally angry with himself for not getting it sooner. Can you believe that? The supposed heretic, the loser of the debate, is still challenging the greatest Stoic of them all centuries later. And that's really the ultimate takeaway here. Challengers and contrarians are absolutely essential. Aristo may have lost the official debate, but his sharp, relentless questions forced mainstream Stoicism to defend itself, to sharpen its arguments, to refine its ideas. And in the end, it made the whole philosophy stronger. Dissent isn't a threat to a good idea, it's a vital part of what makes it great. Which, of course, brings the whole debate right back to us, to you. In your own life, when you're faced with a tough call, what do you lean on? Do you go for the rule book, the practical, established advice, or do you trust your training, your gut, like Aristo's general? It's a question they fought over 2,000 years ago, and it's a question we're all, in our own way, still trying to answer today.